water never sleeps, and neither do the people who work on it. While you were tucked safely in your bed, warm under your blankets, dreaming of ordinary things, someone was out there, floating in the dark, steering a vessel through black, silent water with nothing but dim lights and their own nerves to guide them. Night shift ferry operators see things the rest of us never will, things that don't make it into the official reports, things that get whispered about in break rooms, scribbled into personal journals, or shared only with people who would actually believe them. Tonight, you get to hear 5 of those stories. Welcome back, everyone. You're watching Mr. Shadow's Stories, the place where the darkness speaks and the truth is always scarier than fiction. If this is your first time here, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because trust me, you are going to want to come back for more. Now, turn off the lights, get comfortable, and whatever you do, don't look out the window. Let's begin. Story 1. The Passenger at Mile Marker 7. Submitted by Daniel R., ferry operator, Pacific Northwest, USA. I worked the night shift on a river ferry for almost 6 years. Most nights were uneventful. You get into a rhythm, check the vessel, run the route, dock, repeat. After a while, the darkness stops feeling threatening. It just feels like your office. But there was one night in October. I remember it was a Tuesday because I'd just come off a double shift the day before, where everything changed for me. It was around 2:15 in the morning. The fog was thick, not unusual for that time of year out on the Pacific Northwest water, but this particular night it felt heavier than normal, like the fog itself had weight to it. I was running the late route, which was mostly empty, maybe 1 or 2 vehicles, a handful of foot passengers at best. That night I had 0 vehicles, and what I thought were 2 foot passengers, a couple who had boarded at the south terminal and were sitting quietly at the back of the deck. At mile marker 7, roughly the halfway point of the crossing, I noticed something in the water off the starboard side. A figure, standing on the water. Now, I know how that sounds, I know, but that's exactly what it looked like. A person standing completely upright, dead still, directly on the surface of the water. The fog swirled around it like the figure was generating some kind of heat. It wasn't moving, it was just there, watching. I radioed it in immediately, reported a possible person in the water, because my rational brain told me there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe someone on a paddleboard, maybe a buoy shaped like a person, I don't know. But the Coast Guard found nothing when they swept that area, nothing at all. When I docked at the North Terminal and went to check on my 2 passengers at the back of the deck, the seats were empty. I went back to the boarding logs. 2 passengers had been scanned aboard. No one had disembarked early. There was nowhere they could have gone. The ferry was still moving when I saw the figure in the water. To this day, I do not let myself think too long about what the connection might be between those 2 missing passengers and whatever was standing at mile marker 7. I transferred to the day shift 3 weeks later. I haven't worked a night crossing since. Story 2. She kept asking about the bottom. Submitted by Priya M., ferry operator, Kerala, India. In the village where I grew up, the elders always said that the river remembers everyone who has ever drowned in it. They said the river keeps them. We were told as children never to ask the river questions, because sometimes the river answers back. I thought it was just folklore, just the kind of story adults tell children to keep them away from dangerous water. I didn't believe any of it, until the night a woman boarded my ferry at 1 a.m. during the monsoon season, wearing a white sari that should have been completely soaked from the rain, but wasn't. I noticed it immediately. The rain was coming down hard that night. Every other passenger who had boarded was dripping wet. This woman looked completely dry. Her clothes, her hair, her skin, dry, as if the rain simply refused to touch her. She sat in the middle of the ferry, and she didn't speak to anyone. Most passengers look at their phones or out at the water. She just stared at the floor of the boat with a small, strange smile on her face. About halfway through the crossing, she walked up to the front where I was operating the vessel, and she asked me a question. She asked, "How deep is the water here?" I told her. I said it was roughly 9 meters at the deepest point of this particular crossing. She nodded slowly and said, "That's where they are then." I asked her what she meant. She turned to look at me, and I felt, I have no better word for it, cold. Not from the rain, from her eyes specifically, which seemed to reflect light in a way that human eyes don't. She said, "The ones who sleep at the bottom, I always like to know exactly where they are." Then she walked back to her seat and didn't say another word for the rest of the crossing. When we docked, I watched everyone disembark. She was at the back of the line. I watched her step off the gangway and walk toward the road, and then I watched her simply stop existing. Not walk around a corner, not disappear into a crowd. One moment she was there, the next moment there was just rain and an empty road. I went home that night and called my grandmother. I told her what happened. She went very quiet, and then she said, "You gave her what she wanted. You told her exactly where to find them. Don't go back to that part of the river for a while." I took 2 weeks off work. My grandmother never explained what she meant, and I never asked. Some answers are worse than the questions.
Story 3. The Child Who Knew My Name. I want to start by saying that I am not a superstitious person. I was in the military for 9 years before I took this job. I don't scare easily. I've been in situations that would make most people fall apart completely. I say this so you understand the weight of what I'm about to tell you. It was a winter night, January. The lake was almost completely frozen at the edges. I was doing the last run of the evening, a route across a large lake that takes approximately 22 minutes from shore to shore. There are no stops in between, just open water. A family boarded, mother, father, and a young girl, I'd say around 7 or 8 years old. The parents looked exhausted, holiday travelers probably. The little girl was wide awake and bright-eyed despite the hour. About 10 minutes into the crossing, the little girl came and stood right next to me at the control station. Her parents were asleep on the benches behind us. She looked up at me and said very clearly, "Marcus, when did you first start being afraid of the water?" I turned to look at her. I hadn't told anyone my name. My name wasn't displayed anywhere on the vessel. My badge was inside my jacket. There was no way she could have known my name. I asked her calmly, carefully, how she knew what my name was. She pointed out the window at the dark water ahead of us. "She told me," she said. "She tells me lots of things. She likes you. She says you've been crossing her for 11 years and you've never once dropped anything over the side. She says most people always drop something. She said you're careful." I had been operating this specific lake crossing for exactly 11 years at that point. Not 10, not 12, 11. The little girl then said, "She wants to know why you never talk to her." I didn't know what to say. I asked the girl who she was. The girl smiled and pointed at the water again. "The lady who lives underneath. She watches everyone who crosses. She watches you every single night." Then she turned around and walked back to her parents, just like that, like she'd just made ordinary small talk. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I looked up the history of that lake. In 1887, a woman had drowned in it, a local woman who used to work the old rowing ferry before the motorized vessels came. She had fallen overboard one winter night, alone, with no one to help her. Her name was never fully recorded. The historical document just referred to her as the Ferry woman. I still work that crossing. I don't know why, but I'll tell you something I've never told anyone else. Every single night now, when I reach the midpoint of the lake, I say, "Good evening," out loud to the water. It feels like the right thing to do. Story 4. The Man Who Boarded Twice. Submitted by Yusuf A., ferry operator, Bosphorus Strait, Turkey. Istanbul is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. The Bosphorus Strait is breathtaking, even at night, maybe especially at night, with the lights of the city on both sides reflecting on the dark water. I have been proud to work this crossing for many years, but beauty and terror are not opposites. Sometimes they exist in exactly the same place. The night this happened, I was running a crossing at approximately 3 in the morning. It was a quiet run, only a handful of passengers. I had done the boarding check myself. 12 passengers total. I know because I counted twice, as I always do. Halfway through the crossing, I did my standard walkthrough of the passenger deck. I counted 13 passengers. I stopped. I went back to the boarding gate log. 12 passengers had boarded. The gate had been sealed when we departed. There is no way to board after departure. The gangway is raised and locked. We were in the middle of the strait. I walked the deck again, carefully this time, looking at each face. 12 men and women I recognized from boarding, and then a 13th person, a man in a dark coat, sitting in the far corner at the very back of the boat, facing away from everyone else, looking out at the water. I approached him. I asked for his ticket. He didn't respond. I asked again, louder this time. He slowly turned to look at me, and I want to describe what I saw as carefully as I can. His face was normal, a middle-aged man, nothing overtly wrong with it. But his eyes were, and this is the only word I have, empty. Not blank, not tired, empty. Like looking at windows in an abandoned building. There was simply nothing behind them. He held out a ticket, a valid ticket, with that night's date on it. I took it, looked at it, looked back up at him, and the seat was empty. He was gone. I had been standing directly in front of him for no more than 4 seconds while I looked at the ticket. There was nowhere for him to go. The nearest other passenger was 20 feet away. The railing was directly behind him. The water was 60 feet below. I searched every inch of that vessel. Nothing. When we docked, I reported the incident. My supervisor pulled the boarding camera footage.
12 passengers boarded. You can watch every second of the footage. 12 people, no more. But the walk-through camera on the passenger deck clearly shows me approaching an empty seat in the corner and standing there holding a ticket before walking away looking pale as a ghost. Where the ticket came from, no one could explain. I still have it. I keep it in a drawer at home, and I don't look at it very often, but I know it's there.
Story 5. Don't Count the Lights. Submitted by Elena V., ferry operator, Danube River, Romania. My grandmother used to say there are places in the world where the barrier between the living and the dead is thin like paper. She said rivers are the worst of all, because rivers have always been used to carry the dead to the other side. She said crossing a river at night meant you were briefly sharing a path with things that were traveling in the opposite direction. I thought she was a wonderful, dramatic old woman. Then I worked the Danube night crossing for 3 years, and I understood that she was simply telling the truth. The rule on my route, passed down from operator to operator going back decades, is simple. Do not count the lights on the far bank. When you're crossing at night, you can see the lights of the town on the other side. Houses, street lamps, windows. Every experienced operator on this route knows. Do not count them. Look at them as a general glow. Use them for navigation, but never, under any circumstances, start counting individual lights. I learned this rule on my very first night of training. My supervisor told me without explanation and without humor. He simply said, "You will feel the urge to count the lights. Don't." For 2 years and 9 months, I followed this rule without question. Then, one slow, foggy night in November, with no passengers on board and nothing else to occupy my mind during the 20-minute crossing, I made the mistake of letting my eyes drift to the far bank, and I started counting. 1 light, 2, 5, 8, 12. At 15, the lights went out. All of them, every single light on the far bank, every house, every street lamp, all of it went completely dark, as if someone had thrown a switch. I was suddenly crossing black water toward a pitch-black shore with no navigational reference point. And then I heard it. Knocking from underneath the hull of the boat. Not random, not like debris in the water. Rhythmic, deliberate knocking, like someone below the surface of the water, knocking on the bottom of my vessel with their fist. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock, knock. It lasted for approximately 2 minutes. I stood at the controls shaking, not touching anything, barely breathing. Then it stopped. The lights on the far bank came back on all at once, exactly as they had been. I docked, I walked off that boat, and I sat on the dock for 20 minutes before I could move properly. I quit the night shift the following week. My replacement was a young man, new to the route. I told him the rule before I left. I told him the same way my supervisor had told me, without explanation, without humor. You will feel the urge to count the lights. Don't. For some rules exist because someone, somewhere, learned the hard way exactly why they need to exist. Pass them on. Don't ask questions, just follow them. And whatever is beneath the dark water of the Danube, whatever was knocking on the bottom of my boat that November night, I have made my peace with never knowing what it was. Some things are not meant to be understood. They are only meant to be survived. 5 operators, 5 crossings, 5 encounters with something the water chose to show them. The thing that strikes me most about every single one of these stories is that these were ordinary people, trained professionals doing a routine job. People who had made those same crossings hundreds, sometimes thousands of times before. They weren't looking for anything strange. They weren't expecting anything unusual. The darkness found them anyway. That's the thing about the night shift. It doesn't care whether you believe in it or not. It doesn't need your permission to show you something you'll spend the rest of your life trying to explain. So, the next time you're on a late-night ferry, crossing some dark stretch of water between one shore and the other, pay attention to the person at the helm. Watch their eyes, because they've seen things out there on the water that they will never fully put into words. And if you happen to be on a river crossing at night when the fog is thick, don't look at the lights on the far bank. And for the love of everything, do not start counting. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If these stories kept you up, if they gave you chills, if you found yourself holding your breath somewhere in the middle, then this channel is exactly where you belong. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the Mr. Shadow's Stories family, because we do this every week. New stories, new darkness, new reasons to sleep with the light on. Share this video with a friend who thinks they're brave enough to handle it. Leave a comment below telling me which story scared you the most. I read every single one. The shadows are always waiting, and so am I. Until next time, stay safe out there, especially near the water.